All right, it's gonna give people a couple minutes to filter in here. Don't know if we'll have more than 7. There seems to be a bit of a lull in the action, though. So if you, like I said, I mean, I have that handout for spectrogram reading practice, but other than that, I really haven't prepared anything. At this point, it's more about whether or not you guys have questions you want to ask. So if you have questions, feel free to ask. My experience with Zoom sessions is people tend to be more comfortable asking questions through the chat feature. You can do that if you want, or you can ask using your voice. Either way, this is phonetics, I guess, so it's nice to hear sounds of speech sometimes. But yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. Or let everybody else know too. The final is more about the second half of the course, for sure. So it's pretty heavy on the acoustics, I would say, which is what we've covered a lot of since the midterm exam. But also a variety of other basic things like knowing how to identify symbols and their features, their phonetic features, that sort of thing as well. You can't forget about that. All right, I think yes, it's open book. It's structured just like the midterm, so it's online and you can use whatever resources are available to you, except talking to other people, including anybody else in the class. Yeah, so got a question from Clarissa about looking at the spectrograms of vowels again. I wanted to check my, just looking through, yeah, here we are. I've got the practice spectrogram reading exercise, but these are not about vowels. So, yeah, I think I'll tell you kind of what I know, and I will ask you what you might know as well. So, generally speaking, the way we read vowel spectrograms is by looking at F1 and F2, the first and second formants. So can anybody out there remind me of what F1 and F2 generally correspond with in terms of vowels? I'm in my office. I might draw this on the board. Okay, we got frontness and height. Yeah, I'm going to have to draw it pretty big. That is correct. So which one corresponds to frontness? Which one corresponds to height? Let's see. It's going to work. Got 2 dimensions like that. Can you see that at all? Oh, maybe. So got a vote for F1 is height from 2 people, which is great. So F1 is going to correspond to that dimension, and then F2 is going to correspond to this dimension, which is the front-back dimension. So the trick is to remember that the 0 point is up in the upper right-hand corner of the graph. So this is low F2 here, and that corresponds to back vowels. And maybe I'll type that into the chat as well. And then front corresponds to high F2, like that. And then for F1, low is going to be high in the chart, and then high F1 is going to be low in the chart. And that's where it gets confusing. So a high vowel equals low F1, and then a low vowel equals a high F1. And like I said, I think I'll just type that in there for safekeeping, because I don't know how well you can actually read that from that far away. I could pick this up, right? So there's the chart, and it's also in my inscrutable handwriting, so I will type it in as I said. But you can use that as a basis for looking at vowels. So high F1 is a low vowel. Low F1 is a high vowel. High F2 is a front vowel. And low F2 is a back vowel. So we can talk about some of the basic vowels that we're used to thinking about. So if I say E, like what sort of F1 and F2 values would expect an E to have that vowel? Oops, it's not going to let me do this the way I want it. Stupid autocorrect. Oh, no, maybe. There we go. And I guess I can add, while you're thinking about that question, if you remember, we talked about where the formant values come from. I see there's an answer there, but where the formant values come from are just the resonances of the vocal tract. So kind of a default, oops, that's not that great. A default F1 and F2 for an adult male speaker would be about 1500 hertz in the middle of F2, and then 500 hertz for F1. So you can kind of use that as a reference point. It gets, both those values get a little bit higher for, say, female speakers or for kids or for smaller people in general, but that's sort of where you can just estimate relative values of F1 and F2. So I've got low F1, high F2 for E, that is correct. So maybe take you over to the handout I gave you. I've actually got it posted on a web page because last year it was an exercise. So try to keep chat open here. You guys, hopefully you can see this. This is the first spectrogram on the spectrogram reading exercise I gave you all. I'm just trying to organize my window so I can see it. Do you see any, well, yeah, so do you see any E's in this first spectrogram? So the hint for this one is what you can expect from the final. Or maybe, to make it even easier, let me open this up in Prot. Stop that one. Zoom is great, but it's hard to organize with like everything else on a laptop screen. Let's try this. Okay, so I'll get rid of pitch here. And remember, in Zoom you can also speak as well as chat, text chat. But do you see any E's in this sentence? And the hint again is what you can expect from the final. And we just said we might expect low F1 and high F2 for an E. Yeah, so often when you're reading spectrograms, it's hard to get the whole thing right off the bat. But if you start by identifying individual vowels, that's one way to do it. Yeah, so you're correct. This first vowel is an E. I don't know. I don't think I shared. I don't know if I shared sound with you or not. Let me share sound. Hopefully you can hear that. Yeah, that's good. Do you see any other E's in here? Or anything that looks like it might be an E? Last vowel. That's correct. This is also an E. It's probably going to be a more convincing E.
B, B.
I'm kind of trailing off of my F0 there, so it goes down and sounds a little bit funny by itself, but
B.
That's an E. Got to vote for third vowel. Do you mean this, or do you mean this? This one? Okay, got to vote for E here. So this is a point where looking at these vowels, we can kind of compare. It's a little bit easy with prot because you can just click on where the formant is and get a sense of how it lines up with other formants in the same utterance. So my F2 is about 1695 hertz, so it's a little bit lower than this one, which we said is an E, which is definitely lower than this last one. So maybe F2 is not quite as high, and you can tell me what that means. F1, about the same, maybe it's a little bit higher here at the start, but pretty close. I've got to vote for the second to last one, which I'll assume is this one. And we can kind of compare these formants as well. So these move around a little bit, but here it's close to the same value as that F2, and it's close to the value of that F1. I think E is a good bet here.
B, B.
Yeah, so they're in different contexts, so they sound a little bit different.
B.
That one might be more of an I,
B.
but these are E's.
B.
I'll just say this one is, we saw its F2 is lower. So where would that put us in the vowel space? Anybody want to make a guess? I or A? Oop, maybe? I don't know. That's a new one to me. So let me turn on my IPA font here. So we've got votes for I or A there as well. Got a couple votes for A. Yeah, I think we'll probably not E, but something a little bit backer than E. I think I'm just going to let that one sit. Well, and oftentimes when you're looking at whole sentences, it's easy. It's you kind of have to play it like Wheel of Fortune, where you get individual pieces and then try to like solve the puzzle once you see the whole pattern. Do you see anything else in here that's recognizable based on what we know about the acoustics of individual sounds in English? Often it's easy to identify. Like, yeah, there's lots of stops, lots of not vowels, I guess I would say. Do you see a particular stop, Clarissa? It's fairly easy to identify.
Like right before that mystery vowel we have right now, is that a stop?
This spot right here.
Yeah.
It's a good question. What do you guys think?
Because I know stops will have like that weird little like break almost.
Yeah. Let me see.
So is that more of like a fricative?
This is
There's not like a break?
not a fricative. It's not a stop per se. So this is a good example of a sibilant fricative. There's 3 sibilant fricatives in here. And you can tell because they have this high intensity energy way up at the high end of the frequency scale. These are really obvious. So I'm gonna, for each one of these, because these are usually easy to spot, I'll just put a capital S to denote that it's a sibilant, but we don't know exactly yet which sibilant it is. So if you see a fricative, it'll look something like this. This is not a stop. It's not a fricative. It's something else. Does anybody know what that particular spot is? Megan votes for nasal. Why do you think it's a nasal, Megan?
Honestly, I don't know.
Well, that's the correct answer. It is a nasal. So I'm glad you spotted it. This is, it looks kind of like a vowel, but you can see it's faded out a little bit intensity-wise. So it's got these formants. Nasals tend to have a low frequency first formant, and then everything else is a little lighter up top. You can also see it has these kind of clear breaks from where it ends and begins between the vowels that are around it. Yeah, so does anybody want to make a guess about which nasal this is? And as you're thinking about it, I'll remind you, F2 usually provides really good cues to place of articulation. F2 transitions, that is. And for this F2 transition, it's hanging out here for a while, and then it kind of goes down as it goes into this nasal here. On the other side, it kind of goes down a little bit too. It's not as obvious, but that's the pattern. Got to vote for M. That's a good vote. That's an M right there. For bilabials, the formant transitions go down into them. And this is a good example of that. So we've got a lot going on here. Maybe we can look at some of these sibilants, try to figure out which sibilants these are. Does anybody want to make a guess about those? Kind of got 4 options for sibilants. They're probably either alveolar or post-alveolar, and then they're probably either voiceless or voiced. So can you figure out any of those features for these 3 guys? I think it's voiced. Why do you think it's voiced?
I think that bar at the bottom down there
Yes.
has something to do with voicing.
Yep. All 3 of these are voiced because you can see the glottal pulsing go all the way through them. Yes, so all 3 of these are voiced. Do you think they're alveolar or post-alveolar? We'll put capital Z here because we know they're voiced. Does anybody remember what the difference is between an alveolar fricatives acoustics and a post-alveolar fricatives acoustics? Which one is produced further back in the mouth? So that question you should know the answer to, regardless of the acoustics. You should know which one is proofs further back in the mouth. We talked about that pretty early on in the semester, and talk about that in 201 as well. But you could start there and then think about what acoustic consequences being further back in the mouth might have. Post-alveolar is definitely further back. What might that mean for the acoustics of these guys? So I'm saying these are like S and Esh are both sibilants, which means that they have this high intensity energy way up here, high up in the frequency scale. Joe is voting for lower F2. That's low is the right way to think about it. And just remind us maybe why a further back consonant would have a lower resonant frequency. Basically, that is correct. It's good to know why it's correct, though. The vocal cords are separate from this. So I can actually show you what the vocal cords are doing, the F0 trace here. There's a big bump here in the middle. But for each of these, the F0 is basically in the same range. It's more about the vocal tract than it is about the vocal cords. So further back means shorter vocal tract. You're thinking in the right terms, but the wrong direction, I guess I would say. So the length that we care about is how far it is between the source of the sound and the open end of the vocal tract. So further back would mean a longer vocal tract. And longer vocal tract would mean a lower F2 because longer tubes resonate at lower frequencies. So think about that space, basically. For an S, it gets closer. For an Esh, it gets further away. And so for that reason, you'd expect an Esh to have lower resonant frequencies. So looking back at these sibilants, the long way around here, they have a kind of lower end of their high intensity energy is about 3,700 hertz. That's appropriate for alveolars. For post-alveolars, you'd expect that to be lower, like maybe 2,000, 2,500 hertz, somewhere down here. So I'll just let you know these are voiced post-alveolar, or sorry, these are voiced alveolar sibilant fricatives. They're all Z's, every single one of them. And at this point, you could say, look at this whole thing and try to figure out what's going on with it. Yeah, so these are Z's, not Z's, in other words. So for Z's, you'd expect that darkness to come down a little bit lower, like around here. I wanted to point out, this is subtle, but there is a stop here right before this first sibilant fricative. You can see this because the intensity fades out here at the top end of this. So I'm going to kind of cordon this one off and say this is a stop. So I'll give you the general stop symbol there as like a T. So it's a stop of some sort. But maybe we can figure out what stop that is. Does anybody want to take a guess? Or at least talk about some clues we might have about what stop that is? It's voiced. Yeah, so G or duh. You can see the voicing down here at the bottom like we see for the sibilant fricatives. So that's correct. So why are you picking either G or duh? They just felt right. Okay, one of those is correct. Let's try to figure out which one it is. Okay, Clarissa is saying there's no velar pinching, but actually I'm going to say there kind of is. So velar pinching are when F2 and F3 come together. Sorry. Maybe we can turn on formants here. It doesn't really help out. Oh well, forget that. This is F2 and this is F3, and they come together, and then you can kind of see them stay together in the middle of the gut. There's also a little bit of a cue in this release burst here. You can kind of see two of them, and they're intense around here, around 1500, 2000 hertz. That's a gut right there. And those are a couple clues why. So we're getting closer to seeing everything in here. Anybody want to make a guess about either the answer to the puzzle? And I believe the hint was what you can expect from the final. Or we've got a couple of sections in here. We don't know what this is yet. There's something going on here and there's something going on there. What is this very first bit, by the way? Can you identify the manner of articulation of this stuff? I think back in the old in-person days, this worked a little bit easier with 60 people than 12. Kind of get that hive mind working. But yes, this is a fricative. It's not sibilant because it doesn't have this high intensity energy. So it's a fricative of some sort. I'll put an F there and kind of leave it at that. What about this or this? We could identify their manners of articulation. What's going on with these guys? What kind of sounds are they? Big one is a vowel, correct. This one is a vowel too. And we got into this talking about how to identify vowels. So can we make a guess about what? Let's take the big one. What vowel is this? F2 is about there, 1760. F2 is 660. So F1 is relatively high. It's 660. It's above 500 hertz. F2 is also relatively high. It's about 1800 hertz. You're saying diphthong, and I'm like, well, maybe, but where you're kind of seeing the change is, I think, mostly due to the bilabial stop after it. So maybe we can focus on this bit and say this is something that has a high F1 and a high F2. Where would that put us in the vowel space? Low front vowel. Sounds good. Can you give me an example of a low front vowel that would fit this pattern? Script A might work. I don't have script A in my dialect. I'm going to go with ah. Believe it or not, this speaker is me.
Damn.
Yeah, so I'll say one thing as well. This comes before a nasal consonant, and it kind of becomes increasingly nasalized as I produce it. So this first bit is less nasalized. And then you can kind of hear it already, but this is more nasalized. And you kind of see that F1's faded out. This end curve is from the nasal stop. Yeah, it's from the lips closing more than anything else. So this shows you that this is bilabial stop coming up, basically. And we'll back off here and say, okay, anybody want to solve the puzzle? And if not, oh, there we go. We got one from Melissa. That is the correct answer.
The exam is easy.
Yes. So that's the whole thing. This is an I. This one's a bit misleading because it looks a little bit voiceless, but it's the.
The exam is easy.
Right. And so we were a little unsure about this, but it's an I. Like that. So good job with that. All right. That was. Those are challenging, and that's why it's easier to do this as a group. But kind of gives you an overall review. I'm going to stop sharing for now with that and pause and say, We could do more of those if you want, but are there other questions about anything related to the exam? And it is easy if you study, by the way, if you know your stuff. Because I'm not gonna give you any questions about something I haven't talked about already. The majority of the exam spectrograms, I would say not the majority, but a fair share is about spectrograms. Clarissa votes for acoustics. Okay, let me load up another one. Okay, I've got spectrogram B here. Hopefully you can see it. And we've done one of these. Actually, you know what? I'll stop this for a bit. Let's do easier ones. Without sound. So, right, if you look at the first set of spectrograms in that handout, these are for manner of articulation identification. There's 4 of them, and the options are dog, fog, log, and nog. So this is more multiple choice, which makes it easier. And we can move on to the sentence ones once we work through these, but I think this will help kind of boost our confidence a little bit. So out of these 4, which one is which? And how do you know? Four is dog because of the release burst. Yeah, so that's a good vote. So you can see that at the beginning here, there is a stop release burst. It's actually unvoiced, just an unaspirated stop in this context for English. But this is dog. This is a stop at the beginning. Could we say that 4 has velar pinching? It has it more at the end. Hopefully you can see that here, where F2 and F3 come together. For the beginning, it shouldn't be a velar pinch. It's just F2 coming up, which is what it does to point to the locus of the formant transition for alveolars. So this is pointing in that region of about 1700 hertz. F3 isn't really coming down as much. It comes down more here at the end for the g in dog. But this is dog. So now we just have fog, log, and nog. So that's for spectrograms 1, 2, and 3. Yes, all of them end with G, which helps a little bit. But still good to see the pattern. Okay, 2 is fog. That is correct. So you can see the fricative up here. Unfortunately, I don't have sound files for this, but this is an F. It's not a sibilant. You don't get that high intensity energy here. It's more diffuse, but that's fog. So that leaves log and nog for 1 and 3. Which one is which? Got to vote for log for 1 and nog for 3. Everybody's right. Everybody's scoring points here. How do you know exactly? Give me at least one clue for either L or N in these samples you see. 3 has a nasal pattern we've seen before. For 1, the liquid wouldn't show as much as a nasal. That's one way to think about it. This is the nasal pattern here. It kind of looks like a vowel, low F1, faded out, higher formants. And then it pops on into a vowel once that velopharyngeal port closes. So it goes pretty directly from nasal to vowel, but there's more gradation here for L. It's more of a smooth transition for L. Also for the L, because this is me, pretty much all these are going to be me, F2 starts low because it's velarized. It's a little bit more prominent here than it is down here as well. So this is log, smooth transition, and for nog you get sort of that momentary or instantaneous transition between the two. Okay, good job. The next three are about place of articulation to help you see those transition cues a little bit better. So it's rack, rap, and rat. We have a velar, bilabial, and alveolar, and those are the three spectrograms. Does anybody want to make a guess about which is which? We've kind of been focusing on these a bit anyway. So we got 6 is rack because of velar pinching. Very good. So F2 comes up, F3 comes down. That is rack. There's also a bit of a clue in the release burst, which is pretty subtle, but you can see there's kind of a big bump in energy right around here, right where F2 and F3 come together. And there's multiple bursts. That's rack. 5 is rat. Why do you guess that? Seven has an N curve. Good observation. Not just the curve matters, but where it's going matters as well. Okay, so, yep, there's a couple things going on here. So in 7, the formants point down. Formants point down going into a bilabial. F1 points down, F2 points down, F3 even points down a little bit. It's harder to see. They're all pointing down. That means bilabial. And then we have a weak release burst here at the end. That's subtler, but that's also a cue that this is a bilabial stop. Megan said, this one looks like it stops suddenly, which is kind of interesting. So there's kind of like no transition here, just because the F2 is kind of at the right spot for alveolar anyways. So yeah, this one just kind of stops. And now that I think about it, maybe that's where. So a lot of people in modern English will produce a T as glottal stop in final position, so like rat rather than rat. So you may do that yourself, in fact, or may have heard other people do it. But maybe that's why, because there's kind of like not really transitions here. And you wouldn't get a transition either for a glottal stop. So maybe there's similarity there. But generally speaking, F2 points to about 1700 hertz for an alveolar. And it's already at that level for this one. Looking at this guy, it has to point up to it because it's going down a little bit for the ah here, the backer vowel. Good, you guys got all those right. We'll do 4 more, and these are looking for manner of articulation and coda position. So we've got babe, bale, bane, and bear. So we've got a liquid and a nasal again, and we also got a final voice stop and a final retroflex approximant. So which one is which? Spectrogram 4, which really should be spectrogram 11. I don't know what happened to me there. Sorry, guys. You got to vote for bear. Why do you say that? This F2 looks pretty prominent going down. That might factor into your calculations. Yeah, so F2 is going down here. What is the big cue for How do we know we're dealing with an R? It has a very unique feature. I'll let you know F2 going down is actually not a sign that we're dealing with Something else changes for That's a good hypothesis. So if F2 goes down at the end into something kind of vowel-y here, that's a sign of velarization. I mentioned that above, but with like log, we see that F2 is low because I velarize L pretty much everywhere. So spectrogram 4 or 11 is bale, not bear. One of these three others is bear. Then also babe and bane. Eight is bane. Why do you think that, Megan? The nasal pattern. Okay, I'll take it. Yeah, so this switches on pretty dramatically here. The vowel ends, and then we get this nasal pattern, low, kind of broad F1, weaker, higher formants. So this is bane. Vowel-like but faded. I'll take it. R will have a low F3, so is it 10? It is 10. So F1, F2, F3, and then F3 kind of quickly goes down. It's hard to see because it just gloms right on top of F2, but this is F3 going down for bear. There's a little bit of separation and then it disappears. And then this leaves us with babe for spectrogram 9, and this happens really quickly, but here are the formant transitions for babe. Going down into that final stop. You can see it kind of in F2 and F3, but they always go down into a bilabial. Okay, we're doing great. So I'll go back to Prot, and we can look at that second sentence. And I'll just say...
I just had a question.
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry. So in spectrogram 4, the last one, that big ending curve, can you just repeat why it did that?
This one? In spectrogram 4?
Yeah, like why it does that huge drop.
Yeah, it's bale, and I'm kind of hyper-articulating there, so I'm lengthening it. But it goes down because I raise the back of my tongue up towards my velum or my pharynx. Bale. And so that's going to lower F2. Like making
so do L's always do that?
Yeah, it's sort of like L is kind of always a back vowel is one way to think about it because it has that velar component to it.
So if we see a spectrogram that does that, we can assume that it is ending with an L.
Or
like consider it.
Or like a high back vowel, like
high back
O
vowel.
or U.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We can do this next spectrogram, which is the hint for which is a mathematical truth. And yes, Megan, to go to your question, spectrogram 4 is not an R because F3 is not dropping. F3 stays where it is and actually kind of goes up a little bit. Okay, so spectrogram 13, lucky 13 is about math, not about numerology. So let me open that up in Prot. Yeah, I think you can see it. So we're starting from scratch here. A little more challenging than multiple choice, but I think we can do it. We'll get there in the end. What do you guys see in here? Anything you recognize? Vowels. That's good. Like my daughter the other day was like trying to make up new words, just like going through the alphabet, and she's like, WX, what does that spell? Like, doesn't spell anything unless it has a vowel. So yes, we need vowels. Which vowels do we have? Or can you tell me where the vowels are?
The vowels that we can see are those big areas that have like the distinctive formants. So there's like the 1, 2, 3. There's like 1, 2. There's 5, I think, vowels.
Okay, so let's kind of. I don't want to give too much away here because I don't want to mislead you at the same time. So this looks vowel-y here. Yeah, the likelihood of my daughter becoming like me in the future is growing greater each passing day. I could tell you a story about that. But these are kind of vowel sections in here. Do we see anything else? Stops and nasals. Tell me where at least one nasal or stop is. Nasal after the first vowel.
There's I think a nasal at the very end.
Good call for both of those. Megan's voting alveolar for which one? Or both or none?
There's one after the second verb, or sorry, the second vowel.
So here?
Yeah, right there.
So you think this little spot right in the middle is a nasal?
No, after that.
Here.
Oh, sorry, I'm looking at alveolar.
Okay, so alveolar.
Alveolar, sorry.
Gotcha. Yep. That is correct. This is an alveolar. F2 is right about there. It's not going down really, and it's not linking up with F3. So that's a good clue that it's an alveolar. What about this one? Get that out of the way. Can we figure out which nasal this is? Got to vote for bilabial N because F isn't going down. Yeah, so take a look at F2. And as Megan points out, staying pretty level. So for bilabial, we'd want to see it pop down like we saw in the practice exercises. For velar, we'd probably want to see it go up and meet up with F3 there. So yeah, I think that's also an alveolar. It's a good call with that. Anything else manner-wise we see in here? What sort of manners of articulation can we pick out for these segments? Does anybody see any other nasals?
In the middle, there's like those two verbs in like between those two, sorry, not verbs, vowels. Yeah, between that one and the next one, that little space right there. Would that be a nasal? It's hard to tell because it's really small.
I think it is. Yeah. One right before the third vowel, and yes, there's one here too. And the thing is, like with these alveolars, I'll just give you a higher level cue. There are way more alveolars in English than any other place of articulation. It's kind of a default place of articulation. So if you want to guess, I'd say guess alveolar. Like in the old days when we were in school, we'd say, oh, multiple choice test, the most likely answer is C. So just guess C. Guessing alveolar is kind of the same way. Megan's saying M. I don't know for which one you're thinking that, Megan. But we have two unidentified nasals here. This guy. Also, apparently a vote for the second one. So, yeah, so this is F2. And I guess I will say that's a good guess because it looks like F2 is going down. The tricky part is that F2 is already pretty high here. So I don't want to mislead you. But it turns out this one is actually going to be an alveolar as well. So if F2 gets above that level, about 1650 or 1700, it's going to come back down to get to an alveolar. And that's actually what's going on there. So that's where it's kind of confusable with a bilabial. And that's also a reason why it helps to identify what vowels we're looking at. Those are usually easier to identify than looking at the different nasal places of articulation, which are a little bit tricky. I think you do see S. Clarissa, do you want to let me know where you see S?
I think I see it after the second vowel and after, that thing.
Yeah.
I think that's an S. And then after, like right there as well.
And voting for S. Yeah, this is pretty distinctive, right? So there's no voicing down here for either one of these guys. And the cutoff is pretty high. It's like 3,500 or so. So these are S's. Yeah, phonetically at least. Anything else you see in here?
I think I see a couple stops because there's like those big breaks where there's no formants or anything. Like after the second N, or sorry, the first N. I don't know what I'm talking
So
about.
yeah, it looks like we have a stop here, and actually, on top of that, it looks like there's aspiration here. This looks like an H, a really short H after a stop. So that's probably, this whole thing is probably an aspirated stop. And I don't know if you want to make a guess about what aspirated stop that is. But there's that one. Do you see any, and you mentioned another spot? Where else might there be a stop?
After the S?
Here?
Not that, the other one.
This
Yeah,
one.
that one.
Yeah, and there's
Because again, there's like that break.
similar pattern, right? So it looks like an H and then a stop right before. This is probably an aspirated stop. Okay. I think at this point it might help to identify some of these vowels. Does anybody want to make a guess about some of these vowels? First vowel, a diphthong. Sort of. Why do you think about that? Yeah, I'm going to give you a clue about this. It does go up at the end. This whole, I'll give you a clue because I didn't want to mislead you too much. This first bit is not actually a vowel. This first bit looks like a vowel, but it's something different. So this part is vowel-y. And I would say this last bit, you can kind of attribute to the nasal, the transition there. But we're kind of in the neighborhood of where we want to be there. It goes by pretty quick. Does anybody have an idea about what that might be? Looks like a vowel, but it's not. And it looks like it has, yeah, so it's probably not a nasal because we'd want to see this kind of dramatic shift that we see at the end. It's more gradual. Alyssa votes for a glide. Do you want to vote for which glide it is? W, good call. Yeah, so low F1, low F2. Looks like a vowel, kind of faded out formants, but not that much. And then it transitions into a vowel right after it. At this point, I'll just say the clue for this one is that it's about math. So that might help you fill in some of these blanks here. Does anybody see any other vowels they can recognize?
I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to the vowels, because we know that everything around the vowel will affect it, basically. So where is the best place to check the formant? Like right in the middle, or?
Yeah, so you kind of want to look at the middle. So I'll give you a clue. Like this one is a diphthong. And you kind of see there's a little transition cue here. There's a little transition cue here. But there's kind of like one half here and then another half here, basically. So in this middle spot here, it's kind of where it wants to be. or for this vowel, which is fairly long, like in the middle spot, it's kind of hitting the target it's going for. The transition cues are not as dramatic, but on the edges, it kind of changes a little bit. So anybody want to make a guess about what diphthong that is in the middle? Starts out with high F1, low F2, and then F1 becomes lower, F2 becomes higher. So maybe we could start with this part and say, well, if I have high F1, low F2, where does that put me in the vowel space? Low and back. So what's a good example of a low and back vowel? You're correct. Have confidence in that. What's a low and back vowel? Not script A. So the ah that's not a script A? Is that what you're saying? I'll take it. All right, so maybe that ah. And what's the second half of this? So F1 goes down, F2 goes up. We're starting low and back, but we shift in a different direction. Where do we go for the second half of that? F1 goes down, F2 goes up. A higher frontal vowel. Yeah. So it is a higher frontal vowel, and I said it was a diphthong, so let's guess it's an I, like that. And at this point, I'll just remind you this one's about math. And we filled in a number of these blanks, so that might help you fill in some more. What about this vowel? We have a highish F1, about 700 or so, and a highish F2. Where does that put us? Low front. So can you think of a good example of like a low front vowel? Yeah, you're in the right neighborhood. I'll say it's not quite that low. So maybe an eh. So maybe something like that. So yeah, you're all welcome to fill in more blanks or maybe try to solve the puzzle at this point. We have these stops here. We haven't really talked about them much. You don't get great transition cues because you have like a nasal right before this one and there's a fricative right before this one. If you want to look for cues, you kind of have to look in the release bursts, which are really subtle. Those are what the release bursts look like for those. I don't know if anybody wants to make it. They're both aspirated stops. So that means they're voiceless in English. Any guesses about which stops those might be? And there's also a case where context can help. So which one is T, or are you thinking both are T, Clarissa?
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you repeat it?
Which one is a T?
The first one? That was, I want to say, a ballpark guess.
Okay. So we got votes for both. I'll point out, this is a subtle thing. If you've looked at a lot of these, it's easier to pick up. This one's a little bit weaker than this one. This one's spread out across a wider range of frequencies, and none of them is really prominent. With this one, you see there's kind of a weakness down here, and then it gets stronger up at the top. So I'd say this one's a T. This one is a P. Is there possibly an L after the first stop? Yes, there is possibly an L. Why do you think that?
With sort of what I was thinking the sentence said, there has to be an L there for it to make sense.
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to see because it gloms right into the vowel, but yeah, there's an L in here. Do you have a sense of what that vowel might be? Upside down V, I'll take it. So it's a wedge. I can never remember the code for a wedge. Come on. That one. Yeah, something like that. So kind of an L in here. Oftentimes, after an aspirated stop, the L becomes voiceless. So it's kind of like a voiceless L it starts off with, and then transitions into a wedge. Does anybody want to solve the puzzle at this point? There's not a lot left for us to work with. Yeah. So 1 plus 9 is 10.
1 plus 9 is 10.
Right.
1 plus 9 is 10.
It might fool you a little bit that this is not a voiced Z, but it comes right before a T, and I might devoice a little bit there.
1 plus 9 is 10.
Right. So just to fill in the rest of the blanks, that's an N. There's another. I can never do that right. Another wedge. Yeah. So that's that one. There's one more on the handout. But at this point, we're at 2. I think I'm going to call it a day for spectrogram reading. I'll send you guys the answers to the answer to the last one at some point when I send out sort of the production exam as well. Yeah. So thanks for coming as well, and good job. You got everything right, which is nice to see. So yeah. Hope you all have a good day. Bye.